Hi, my name is Alexander Hall, and this is my reading review vlog of the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. So, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass is a memoir and a treatise on abolition and was written by Frederick Douglass himself in 1845. And Frederick Douglass was arguably one of the most famous and influential anti-slave orators during the mid to late 19th century. And he was an American, in addition to being an orator, he was an American social reformer, an abolitionist, a writer, and a former slave. And the context surrounding his book had to do with abolition and Douglass's ambition to become a free man. In conjunction with his ambition to become free, Douglass's memoir was also written to highlight the events and struggles, surrounding Douglass's life and what he had to endure as a slave and later on as a free man in antebellum America. And in a certain light, Douglass's memoir pays tribute to a broader representation of the challenges that many African Americans often encountered during their lives as slaves. And the sacrifices that they made to escape slavery. For example, as stated in the book, the cruel interactions between the slave and the slaveholder, and having no certainty of what the future might hold for them. And the major historical events happening at the time that the memoir takes place was obviously that chattel slavery was prominent in the southern United States, and that prompted many African Americans to make the ultimate sacrifice of making the treacherous journey to escape the South to pursue freedom in the North, even though the consequences of that of doing so were often very severe. So the overall narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass provides some general information of what it was like to be a slave in antebellum America. But it also gives us a very detailed firsthand account of the events that took place in Douglass's life, that pushed him to pursue his own freedom. For example, in the beginning of his memoir, Douglass describes how one of the very first memories he has at an early age was that his Aunt Hester was being whipped. And this is a disturbing image for, any child to witness. And, it also serves as a foreshadowing of, many similar events that would take place throughout the memoir. And then the memoir transitions to a point where Douglass moves to Baltimore. And this is important because this is where he learns how to read and write, and it is also where Douglass learns about the word abolition, and where he forms a new hatred of slavery, which I'll dig into deeper later. And in addition to that, this also fuels his idea to pursue his freedom. And from the time Douglass learns how to read and write up until the point where he escapes, his memoir describes disturbing images to the reader on how he ended up under his master named Mr. Covey, who was described as a Negro breaker. And he beat him and whipped him multiple times on a regular basis. And he also talks about the time he ended up in William Freeland's plantation. And there he taught other slaves how to read and write, and eventually Douglass formulated a plan with a small group of slaves from this plantation to escape. However, he ended up getting caught and thrown in jail. But following his release, about a week later, he returns to Baltimore and to work at a shipyard as an apprentice. And in the end, Douglass finally manages to escape, but does not provide the details of how he did it in order to protect the people that were accomplices in his escaping, which, obviously, for Douglass, those consequences would have been more severe than the people who helped him. But the people who helped him, even if they were white, they will also carry pretty severe consequences for them too. Some of the book's highlights and most interesting passages. One of the most interesting and touching passages that I think of in the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass was the point in the memoir where Douglass learns where he learns that slaves are basically valued like livestock, and this, equating human beings to livestock kind of dehumanizes the African American, and this causes him to develop a new hatred of slavery. In chapter 8, page 39 of the text, Douglass describes how his feelings rose up in detestation of slavery, and how he had a new conception of his degraded condition, due to the fact that, he learned that, he's just valued like livestock. It's not human, it's degrading. And he then continues to describe in the same chapter how they were all ranked together. There's a quote here, and it says, quote, "We were all ranked together at the valuation. Men and women, old and young, married and single, were ranked with horses, sheep, and swine. There were horses and men, cattle and women, pigs and children, all holding the same rank in the scale of being, and were all subject to the same narrow examination." Again, this concept that Douglass begins to learn at an early age, where he and other African American slaves, how they're subordinate to the whites, and African American slaves being valued like a commodity, like any other commodity. That was just very frustrating to him and very degrading to find out. So one of the only shortcomings of this text that I could really think of was maybe that it could have done a better job to highlight some of the struggles that women had endured as slaves as well, and the sacrifices they had to make. Now, I completely understand that, obviously this is Frederick Douglass's memoir, and it does pay tribute to a broader struggle shared by many African Americans, but it was not representative to the women who oftentimes endured, much harsher conditions than men did. So yeah, that was really the only kind of omission that I saw. But overall, it was a very well put together memoir, a very powerful and impactful memoir, and it really gave me, it just reinforces the idea in my head of how brave some of these people were in antebellum America, and how they have inspired many great leaders that we see in the modern world today.